Okay, now that we've installed the template, let's go ahead and create our module project. I've got Visual Studio open right now. In Windows 7, I've chose to run as administrator. I'm going to click File, New Project, Visual C# Web, and you'll see here is our module template. I'll select that, and then I'll enter the name of the project. Now, naming your project is kind of important. It's a good idea if you look at some of the professional DNN module vendors. If you've ever installed any of their modules, you can look at what their DLL names are and get an idea of what their project name was. And typically a good rule of thumb is to name it, like company name dot, DNN or dot modules dot your module name, something like that, as well as the namespace. So just kind of get some ideas from other vendors. But for right now, I'm just going to use module example. The important thing to note here is typically when we create a Visual Studio project, it puts it in your Documents Visual Studio 2010 Projects folder. But this is not what we're going to do for our module. We're going to browse and we're going to find the folder that was created for us in the previous video where we installed DNN6, which was in, I believe it was My Documents, My Websites, Dotnetnuke. And then now that we're in the root folder of Dotnetnuke, we're going to pick the Desktop Modules folder and choose Select Folder. So again, you should be in the Dotnetnuke installation website folder and inside the Desktop Modules folder. Then we're going to leave Create Directory for Solution unchecked because we don't want it to create another nesting of folders for the solution. And then we'll click OK. Now our module project is created, and you can see that the template created a bunch of stuff for us by default. It created our edit settings and view controls. It created our manifest. It created some base classes, which we'll discuss. It created a bunch of folders. One is for the build scripts. One is for our components, our business logic. Another is for our data components and our data logic. Documentation providers, which is containing our data providers, which in here has our SQL scripts, which we'll discuss in a little bit. What I wanted you to look at is the references here. This is how everything works. The two references that it included from the Dotnetnuke, which is referenced by the Dotnetnuke installation, is the Dotnetnuke library and the Microsoft application blocks, the data access layer. We're not going to use this data access layer, but it's referenced anyway by default. But the Dotnetnuke DLL is the core API for all access to the Dotnetnuke functionality. This is referenced from the bin folder that's within the Dotnetnuke project. So if you go up one folder, it's in the Dotnetnuke ASP.NET Web Projects bin. This is where that's being referenced from. So the other thing I wanted to discuss was back to the data provider, these SQL scripts, is if your module requires data access, then you will have to provide for your installation a SQL data provider script and an uninstall SQL data provider. What these are is just a simple text file which Dotnetnuke will use to run SQL scripts that you provide in here. So, and they're all versions. So for this one, you have version 0001. That's your first version of your module. If you have tables and stored procs or views or whatever that your module uses, you'll define the creation of those tables and stored procs and views in the SQL data provider file. As well as if your users decide to uninstall your module, you'll provide the drop scripts for your database resources. We'll discuss a little bit this later when we start getting into creating our data layer. The other thing I wanted to do is set up some other folders that the template doesn't do for us. In the data folder, you can see it provides a default data provider, which is an ADO.NET code that uses the Dotnetnuke singleton ADO.NET data pattern. We're going to do something a little different a little later on in the video. We're going to actually build our data access layer using linked to entities, or the entity framework. So I'm going to create a couple folders for that right now, just as part of the setup, but I'll explain them later on. One is adapters, and the other models. Okay, and another thing I like to do, which the template doesn't do for us, is create a folder in the root called resources, and under that we'll have images, and another one, scripts. And this is fairly obvious. It's just a way to organize better if your module requires images or JavaScripts in order to function. Well, now that the project's set up, let's do a quick little build and see if this thing actually works right out of the box. So I'll do a build in debug mode, and it succeeded. And now what I'm going to do is build it. I'm going to change it to release mode and build it again. As you can see, it did a few extra things in the build output. When you build in release mode, that's what invokes the MS build script, which actually builds your module installation package. So if we were to look at the project in Windows Explorer, let's find that here. You can see that desktop modules, module example, you can see that in this packages folder that got created for us, we have both an install and a source package. That's the beauty of this module in this MS build task, is that once you build, all you have to do is do a release build, and you've automatically built your based on your manifest, your packages, both your install and your source package.